Welcome back to another episode. This is the SoapyRao show. On today's episode, I'm joined by Pratha Shetty, an interculturalist. I love that. I said it on the phone the other day to you, and it still sounds really cool. I know you have a lot more to say about it, but just as that introduction, I don't do introductions, but I want to say the interculturalist. It sounds like a movie by Dan Brown, the interculturalist, where Tom Hanks finds out that someone in a wheelchair who found culture, something like that. But Pratha, thank you so much. And I hope I'm saying your name right. Is it Pratha or Pratha?
Pratha, yes, you're saying it
Pratha.
right.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Because every time I put Pratha on my phone to type it and it makes it PAR, it suddenly thinks that I have issues. I have issues most of the time, but I'm trying to get something right. It corrects me. So, really appreciate you reaching out and thanks for joining me on this episode to share your story and to share what you talk about in life, your book, and how you help people. So, there's a bunch of things to cover and a bunch of things to talk about. And I want everyone who's listening to this to not miss out on aspects of your work in your life. So, firstly, you share your time, at least the past few years, between Bombay and France. And I always
Yes.
like to throw in a foreign element into this podcast to make it sound internationally appealing.
Sound fancy. An
Yeah,
interculturalist from France.
yeah, it just sounds good. So, how did this thing, first of all, how did this idea of, I mean, I suppose as Indians, we do have a sense of cross culturalism, even being within the country and not traveling, right? Because we're sort of immersed with so many different ideas and so many different languages, so many different people all the time. But how did you specifically go into this space of intercultural communication or helping people communicate interculturally?
So I think it happened when I was, not I think, I know it happened when I was doing my master's. So
Hmm.
I was one of those people who wanted to pursue an MBA and be one of the C-suite executives who's going to make the big decisions.
Hmm.
However, I was always interested in history. I was always interested in culture to a certain extent as well. My mom's a history teacher,
Okay.
so that helped. However, I didn't really have the exposure to the world of interculturalism or of
Hmm.
intercultural training. But there was this very kind lady who had come to our college, and she started speaking about this book by Clotilde Rapiel.
Hmm.
It's called
I
Culture
see that. I just
Code.
see that. How it just makes the podcast feel so much more high quality when you just said that there.
You never know, maybe I'm pronouncing it incorrectly.
No, no,
But
it sounds good. It sounds good to me. That works. Okay, so sorry for
so
interrupting.
no problem at all. And I went into the library and I started reading the book.
Hmm.
And this man is interesting. This work is something that I've never even heard of before,
Hmm.
and I want to explore that. So what he would do is he would reason people's behaviors,
Hmm.
especially buying behaviors, with respect to their cultures.
Hmm.
That why would an American prefer an alcohol which says shot
Hmm.
as opposed to somebody from France who would prefer like a slower drink and would not like to call their alcohol
Hmm.
shots. So
Yeah.
yeah, so the differences in the culture from a very consumer buying perspective. And I just went into a rabbit hole. Except for Rapiel, I started reading other work as well.
Hmm.
And I wanted to explore this academically, and there was only one school in France that was offering intercultural, like an MSc
Hmm.
in culture and negotiations.
So you scrapped
And
the MBA idea. You went straight for the MSc.
no, I did complete my
Oh,
MBA
you've done a
as
double
well.
masters. Whoa.
Yes, I'm a
Okay.
double
I think
master's.
you're too qualified for this podcast.
Okay, bye then.
Plus,
I
that's
made my
fantastic.
South Indian parents very proud, though.
No, that's excellent. Yeah. No, I think, that's a strange thing. I think just to start off from that, you are from the same region of the country that my family's from. I think maybe your parents or grandparents are from near Mangalore, right? From your last name.
Yes,
Yeah. So
yes.
even though we have similar roots, we've never sort of been in the same place. I think
Mm-hmm.
but the culture, this thing we hear so much nowadays, especially with certain governments or certain people in power, this idea of
Mm,
culture and identity, and you mentioned something interesting. I wasn't planning to go down that path, but that whole idea of alcohol, how it's perceived, the culture of drinking, say in France
mm,
versus England versus the US, where there was prohibition and they had all these things many years back. But when people talk about India, like it's against Indian culture, I'll give you a context of why I say this. I had done a show which was at a mall, which I typically avoid because there's a lot of kids, and it's very distracting, and they sort of make you tone down your set to make it very family friendly. And a
Mm-hmm.
cousin had showed up with her family saying, I can at least be here at the show so my kids can appreciate it. I'm like, I don't write jokes for your kids, right? That's not my target audience. And after the show, I think a few months later, she said, oh, I saw Sandeep. She was telling my mom, I saw Sandeep show at the Phoenix Mall. It was so good. Then she looked at me and said, it was a family friendly show. And she goes, as every show in India should be, because we are a family friendly country. And I was like,
Wow.
what a patronizing woman. She's my cousin, but fortunately I never meet her. But here's this thing we repeatedly hear, whether it's with, comedy, or whether it's stuff which is seen as risque, or with alcohol, it's against Indian culture. So what is this
Hmm.
idea that we derive? Like, can we pick and choose depending on who we are? Like, what can you define what Indian culture is for you? Can I define what Indian culture is for me? I personally think, besides a few underlying fundamentals, which is maybe region or language, or maybe the idea of family, I think beyond that, there is a very personal element of culture that we can embrace as individuals who belong to a certain nation or a certain geography or a certain group, right?
Yes. Firstly, I
Okay.
feel like a nation is a notion,
Mm.
right?
Nicely
And
put. Yeah, I think that's really important.
especially especially in India, I can't generalize India. And I think we spoke about this before as well.
You mentioned that, yeah, that it's not
Yes,
so much a country.
it's not so much one country, like how I usually compare the European Union to our
Mm-hmm.
republic,
Yeah.
because it's, once you cross borders within Europe, you're entering into a different culture, a different region, a different language.
Mm-hmm.
That holds the same for India as well. And
Mm-hmm.
each region is so distinctive.
Yeah.
So India as a culture, you cannot generalize. Secondly, I think this is worldwide. The urban and the rural are different cultures as well.
Oh, yeah.
We
Big divide. I mean, big
Yes, and
divide in, yeah.
and a big divide, and a big divide worldwide.
Mm-hmm.
So what alcohol, for example, if we're talking about alcohol, would mean for a person in rural India is not the same what it would mean for a young millennial who's going out to drink in a bar,
Or
right?
even for that matter, a laborer working on a city dwelling, like one of these construction workers, they don't drink like how. I mean, of course, we can't generalize in that group as well, but like
Mm-hmm,
you hear these
mm-hmm,
stories of men going on the way back home, just knocking back three, four quarts of drink and going back and just sort of, expressing their frustration in life, versus
hmm,
someone, who's worked on the farm in, say, Kerala. And of course, I'm saying it's an individual thing what they do with under the influence,
hmm,
but how alcohol is perceived, right? You mentioned that is very different, because here it's seen recreationally, it's seen as a status thing,
hmm.
versus something like, just to release the
A
tension from people.
pain. So it's also to release pain, and I
Yeah,
can confirm that with you, because even I did work at a farm when I was in France. I was cutting grapes on
right.
a farm, and I know the result of physical labor and how
You mean the
alcohol can
physical
actually,
pain? Right,
yeah, the
right, right.
physical pain as well. And it
It
does
de-stresses. Yeah,
have, it de-stresses you.
yeah.
So yes, firstly, generalizing India is impossible.
Mm-hmm.
Generalizing, because as interculturalists, what people also often assume is we only speak about the culture of a country.
Yeah.
Everything is different. A culture of an industry can be
Mm.
much different than the culture of some other industry. A culture of a city is way different than the culture of another city. For
Yeah.
example, I'm sure Bangalore has a pub culture, which is amazing, but Bombay has a different perception towards going out or towards
Mm.
alcohol. So it's very difficult, firstly, to pinpoint what culture stands for in India. If India stands for family, if India can be branded as a
Yeah, yeah. Family
as a
friendly country.
country,
Yeah,
as a family friendly
yeah.
country.
I mean, this
Uh,
conversation again, right? I mean, not to sort of deviate from what you're saying, but it's so easy to use this word culture to prevent growth of multiple aspects of society, right? You can say that because I'm a certain authority in power right now, or a certain group or a certain individual in power, I will impose my perception of what I think is culturally right onto a group, and thereby say that this is Indian culture. Whether,
yes, I
yeah,
yes. I'm sorry, but I think culture has gotten a very bad rep
yeah, that's
these
exactly what I was
days.
trying to come to, because you can say that these set of clothes, these set of foods, these set of songs, these set of languages are, pro culture in our Indian context at this point in time, which is complete bullshit, right? Because I personally think that what makes any country or any group of people or anyone more progressive or more tolerant is by
Hmm.
understanding that you're not the only one in existence and that your practices are the only one which is right, which
Hmm.
makes you more receptive, at the same time more sort of susceptible, which is great, I think, as a part of a human experience.
Hmm.
Realizing that you can have opinions and people have other opinions which are rival to yours and which make it a better sort of a situation, right? When that's the idea. We can't have 7.2 billion people just doing the same thing day in, day out.
It gets boring.
It gets boring, yeah, which is not the idea of human beings, right? That's not how we came
Yes.
to this point.
Yes. Of course, imposition of a culture, imposition of an idea is
Mm,
always wrong.
mm,
And I think as human beings, it's about feeling like you're part of something bigger than yourself. It's
mm.
the feeling of belonging. It's the feeling of belonging to people who are similar to you.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah,
So culture in that sense is very important. And if you want to feel that you belong to something important, you will always propagate it.
yeah. I think
But
especially when you're scared of rejection, right?
of
From that,
losing it,
yeah, of losing that sense of membership.
yes,
Yeah.
when you have that innate fear of losing it, when you have that innate fear of seeing it change,
Mm,
that resistance automatically comes in. So
yeah.
just to give you a parallel example, there are many Indians who moved from India abroad, for
Yeah.
example, the United States in the 90s. And if you speak to them, and this is again, I'm generalizing, no offense to any of your listeners who moved there to the
Yeah.
90s, but especially the parents do have a certain idea of what Indian culture is,
Mm.
which is from that generation, which is from
They
that
kind
era.
of got India's in India and their head was, especially I've noticed this beyond the 90s, so more like the 70s, 80s, right? I have uncles and aunts.
Yes,
They have this
yes.
sense, and they also went in a time when there was scarcity in India, right? So
Hmm.
they grew up with this notion that India, and when they left, froze in time for them. So they have
Correct.
this idea that they bring up their kids to certain kinds of movies, certain kinds of ideas that don't spend too much, have a safety net, kind of this idea, which many parents from who stayed back here have
Hmm.
moved on from there, right? They've
Evolved
become more,
from that.
yeah, become more open-minded with that sense of India's changed, and they witness to that change firsthand, which
Hmm.
is such an important contrast because you'd think going to the West earlier was perceived as, oh, liberal, open-minded, right?
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
they're more narrow-minded in some ways.
Yeah, and you hold on to that. It's not,
Yeah.
again, that's the thing, right? As interculturalists, we never say broad or narrow.
Well, I'm not one, so I'll be devil's advocate for you. I'll
Thank
say
you.
the things that you don't have to
Because,
say.
we have to be very
Yeah,
careful, especially when we are addressing a multicultural audience. What happens is when
yeah.
you label somebody as broad or narrow, and especially now since things are so sensitive,
Mm,
um, it's about the feeling of letting go. And if you let go of what you have, then what are you?
mm,
So if you take away that sense of identity, so that sense of identity for them probably is the culture of 70s or 80s when they left India.
mm.
And if you take that away from any individual, then you feel lost. And it happens many times with many Indians when they're living in the country as well. Their sense of identity strongly becomes religion.
Yeah.
So if you take religion away from me, what am I? What is my identity?
Yeah,
It
which is a
has.
very strange sort of balance which we've struck in India, right? Is where you have a large population which has not been given a sort of sense of dignity in life when it comes to
Hmm,
access to public health, access to education, clean water, food, etc. But
hmm,
you kind of appease them by giving them this religious safety net, right? When they have festivals or Diwali right now, which is going on, that burst crackers, distract yourselves from the real problems in life. But the moment they ask for real value in life, to be
hmm.
recognized as human beings who have so many things, that is not given to them, which
Yes.
find a bit hypocritical, right? Because instead of doing what's important, and that way a society grows, when people are like, you know what, I'm important as a person in this country, instead of that, you're like, no, no, you're nothing, you work for menial wages, but we will recognize the fact that when we need your votes, we will bring you in the bus loads to the cities to vote or whatever it may be, right?
Hmm.
No,
Yeah, it's
yeah,
yes, it's the disparity, firstly, that gives more space to conversations about religion, probably in the negative sense. I think that
yeah,
disparity creates that space, that vacuum wherein you can have these conversations that
Yeah.
can be diverted into things that are not as important.
Mm.
But and this is coming from a person who didn't really prioritize religion when she was in her own country. You
Okay.
start romanticizing it when you leave it, when
Mm.
you're away, when you have a bird's eye view of what your country actually is.
Mm.
And the, my intensity of romanticizing about Indian culture, about my religion, as well, it intensified, and
Right.
everything just made sense to me. Okay, now my priorities have changed.
Do you get a sense that when you said priorities changed, did you get a sense when you were, say, doing your course in France? Or
Hmm.
and was it in a big city like Paris, or was it in a small?
No, it was in a small city, so it gets
Right.
even more heightened. Yes, I
Yeah. So did you
was.
sense that you had to defend your Indianness, whatever that Indianness might have meant for you?
I
Did it?
think I did get defensive,
Mm.
rather, when it came about certain ideas that people had about the country.
Right. Like I'm
And
sure, yeah, because I want to tell you my point after you think, because there are some things, right, like the accent or the cows on the road, these typical stereotypes
hmm,
that everyone's
hmm,
like, especially if you go to a country like America, where they
hmm,
have these notions that, oh, like they have the bindi, the dots and the feathers. I mean, some
hmm,
are on borderline, even sort of some people would claim racist in a way. But
yeah.
did you sense that even a country like Europe, which in your opinion resembles an Indian model of a collection of states, did
Hmm.
people there seem a little bit unaware and as a result insensitive?
I think it was the case with the older population.
Hmm.
They hadn't traveled much. They had, been within Europe. They had a high sense of pride for their country because, they were people who fought wars, who've
Hmm.
seen people die for their country. So there's a high sense of pride there.
Hmm.
And their discussion with culture or countries would directly be comparative. Like, oh,
Hmm.
this is what happens in my country. I'm sure this doesn't happen in yours. Or they are, they
Oh
are,
God, yeah.
yes.
No, I
So I
remember
will.
meeting this man in America once. He's my friend's dad, and we had gone to her house, and this man was breaking a broken pipe, sorry, fixing a broken pipe in their driveway. So he was in this pit of mud, and water was gushing, and he was trying to seal this pipe. And I happened to be there, and he looks up, he goes, "Hey, buddy, how's it going? Does this remind you of your days as a young boy in the Ganges?" And I'm like, that's pretty funny. Like I've never been to the Ganga, right? But this man went to I thought that was a pretty well thought through. If you want to take it as a recent joke, pretty well thought through. Like he's done his research, gone Ganges. Okay, I like, you know what? Credit where credit's due. And this girl's granddad just before that is like, "Hey man, how's it going? Where's your basket case with the snake in it?" I was like, this
Oh la
family
la.
is.
They saw one movie that had all the Indian stereotypes, and then we're going to use it with this one person, brown man
They
that we know.
really were waiting. This was
Like
like their
Ganges,
correct. They were
snake.
holding on. When we got that one Indian to our house, we'll unleash. And there I was. This, I thought the Ganges one was fucking awesome. It just, no, but it's
Yeah,
yeah. Go
it's
on.
very similar with the older population in
Yeah.
France, though. But the younger population was much more traveled. They have a
Mm,
lot of exchange programs, and they have um, like being an interculturalist is not as exotic a profession as it is
well, I
here.
think let's just go. I know and as I told you before we started, this is not like
Hmm.
sort of Q&A. I'm not going to pick your brains and your profession, but I think just for people to understand, it sounds really cool, but in a nutshell, or
Hmm.
maybe more than a nutshell, maybe whatever shell you want to choose.
Mhm.
What does your job involve? What do you do on a daily basis, and sort of how do you prepare people using this role of yours?
Okay. So simply put,
Mm-hmm.
what I do is I train European people,
Mm-hmm.
especially Western European executives,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes American,
Mm-hmm.
the Indian culture. And I
Okay.
do the same for Indian people and Indian executives about the Western European or American culture. So that would involve many things.
Mm-hmm.
But most importantly, it is uh, giving reasons or reasoning
Mm-hmm.
about a person's behavior from a certain country, but giving them a cultural context that this person is probably behaving in this way because this is what his culture prescribes to him or her.
So is this sometimes okay? There are a couple of things that come up there. One is, how nuanced is it? I mean, first of all, is it case by case? Is it client by client? Is it individual by individual? Or just like certain, there's a 101, culture 101 for India. And
Mm.
um, is this sometimes for conflict resolution or is it like a preparation? Because, I mean, firstly, the thing I would do if I was in your position is just mess with everyone, right? Give completely different cultural things and just go there. And, but I'm glad that I'm not doing what you're doing. So,
I've been tempted. I've been tempted. I
yeah, I
won't
mean, how powerful is
deny.
that, right? You go there and like can give this Indian executive, if a Japanese guy bows in front of you, that means he wants to get in bed
He wants
with
you to
you.
kick you in the
He
nose.
wants to get in bed with you, and the guy's like, oh, no, no, no. Anyway, I'm
Yes,
glad you don't do that.
yes,
Uh,
well, without revealing too much, I did do one training for the French Navy.
uh-huh.
So they were building the INS Scorpio. So the engineering team from France was interacting with the Indian team.
Hmm.
And there could have been an opportunity for me to mess up there. Like, no,
I
there's
wouldn't call
too
it a
much
mess up.
online there.
I call it cultural empowerment.
Empowering who?
Compare yourself. Give a new sense of Indian identity, right? Just some sense of French people. Like we just heard from these culturals that Indians love cocaine, and everyone's like, "What?" That's a gift when you go. We're not halvas anymore. We give cocaine, and that'd been hilarious. That's a cool scenario, right? Like there are layers there. You're dealing with French people, and
Yes.
I really apologize to any French person for that attempted French accent. I mean,
Accent. Like the
yeah.
best part about it was the accent,
Hey,
actually.
thank you. Okay, that was my attempt. Francois. Okay, that's such a stereotypical
Jean-Pierre.
name. Yeah, Jean Pierre. Where's your beret? Well, I'm a Navy SEAL. Okay. So these guys are first of all in the Navy, so they're a little bit more proud of the thing, and they're French. In French, the stereotype is very proud of their Frenchness, right?
Mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm.
now you're dealing with sort of the armed forces where the people are, to tend to be a little bit more patriotic or a little bit more, the fervor for their national identity is higher. So you are working in an environment which is a little more sensitive anyway, or are people completely not like what I just said, but more chill? Because I've met some Indian people from the Indian Navy, and they were so sweet at a show. They're like, the next time you're out on the coast, Kundapur, that's where we come from, like the Mangalore coast. They said you
Yes.
must come and visit the ship, and I'm like, oh, cool. And so sometimes this is my exact misperception, right? Am I getting it wrong that the people in the Navy are more strict, or am I reading into this too much anyway?
Actually, culture in general is very nuanced,
Mm.
like you said. So I think a lot of the weight depends on the person who's training,
Okay,
you know.
okay.
So if you want the individual to be open
Mm-hmm.
to, first of all, criticism about their, not criticism, but what doesn't sit well
Mm.
about their culture with their counterparts,
Mm.
you have to prepare them for that. Right?
So that's your
So
job to kind of.
yes, to set
Okay.
context before we get into anything.
Mm-hmm.
So firstly, it's also a huge responsibility to first create a safe space. Just to give you an example, what happens many a times is, especially when there are French and Indian executives interacting, a lot of conversation about caste, about
Right.
Hindu Muslim, about
Mm-hmm.
India Pakistan.
Mm.
All of these sensitive topics, they do come up, and you
So this is
need
what
to
your client would
embrace
ask you. A
yourself.
Western client would ask you about these things.
Yeah, so
Mm.
should I be conversing about these things? How
Mm.
important is it? Because having political conversations for certain, especially certain French people, is normal. It's dinner table conversation almost.
Yeah,
But it
yeah,
may
yeah.
not be dinner table conversation for many Indians because it's affected us in a different way.
The
Your
religious
relationship, yes,
context.
your
Yeah,
relationship
absolutely.
with authority is different based on where you come from.
Mm-hmm.
Our relation, as Indians, our relationship with authority is very different because of our history,
Mm.
our modern and ancient history. Our relationship with hierarchy and authority is different than from a person from France or even Germany, for that matter.
Yeah,
You can imagine a relationship with a central authority for a
yeah,
German person is going to be very different.
yeah. And I think for the longest time, I just to interject with the point over there about my growing up, right, in a
Hmm.
big city like, I mean, now it's a big city, but Bangalore in say the 80s and 90s was this aspiration to be almost like British. And I've done a show about this, where
Hmm.
there was this sort of colonial hangover, and the people in Bangalore in the 50s, 60s, especially the cantonments, right? Like the likes
Hmm.
of Ooties and the Punas and the Bangalores. And was this idea of speak English well, kind of, not wouldn't be subservient, but kind of be impressed by people who are white,
Hmm.
and that's still there. I still sense that, not in me alone, but I still sense that. And what is happening, I feel, as a result now, is there's this anti movement
Hmm.
where there's this thing like, screw English or screw any white person, like we're going to show India the brownness, whatever it may be, right? So
Hmm.
I feel there's an overcompensation right now. But yeah, this idea that you mentioned, right, with this the way we look at authority is, for
Hmm.
India especially, we were always made to feel, and this is something not from a point of view, I'm not a historian, but we were made to feel that what we think is our strength, whether
Hmm.
it's our belief in family, whether it's our belief in certain practices, whether, say, for example, yoga, or whether it's certain things like bathing in a certain number of times a day, or eating meat or not eating meat, all those things were ridiculed by
Hmm.
people who invaded us, right?
Hmm.
Who ruled over us. So that, I feel, has set a blow to us, going, oh, we're not going to, you're not supposed to flaunt it. Don't even talk about it. In fact, hide your Indianness. Now
Hmm.
it's gone, I feel, to a way where you can kind of take these aspects of Indianness, which is Bollywood dancing or wearing a sari on, say, Oxford Street or whatever it may be, right? How
Hmm.
Bollywood portrayed Indianness, right? Like with like Buckingham Palace and Shah Rukh Khan dancing on the top of it or whatever it may be.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I feel
Hmm.
there's more of that thing. So like Indians going and taking selfies or whatever it may be, right? So I
Yes.
feel that is not bad in any way, but I feel we're kind of doing that to compensate for this fact that, oh, we were always perceived as not good enough. And that happens as
Yes.
individuals as well, not whether it's Indian or French or whatever. On a very individual level, if someone's mocked you your whole life for some aspects or traits of yours, you kind of overbalance and say, I'm going to do the other extreme now,
Hmm. Hmm.
I
Yes,
sense that
and
as well. Yeah.
yes, and one of the main tactics of any invaders or colonizers
Mm.
is to prove to the people who are getting invaded that they are barbarics.
Mm. Okay.
You know, that in the French did this as well, and the British did this as well. The
Mm.
French called their invasions a mission to civilize people. They did
Mm.
invade huge part of Africa too. In the
Right.
same similar, it was the same with the British. So
And the Dutch
one
and
way
yeah.
of, yeah, and the Dutch as well. So the one way of civilizing people, according to them, was through language.
Right.
Right? You take away their language,
Mm.
and you take away a lot. And I've had that experience of trying to assimilate into a culture where it's a completely different language, and it's very difficult.
Yeah,
Right?
absolutely.
So it's very difficult.
So is it as bad with I mean, do you feel a little reserved to speak it, because I've done it, I felt it like with English
Hmm,
in the
hmm,
UK. Do you
hmm.
feel it did you feel it in France as trying to learn French, or do they mock you for certain pronunciations or certain?
Oh, definitely,
Oh, okay,
definitely.
okay.
But in France, I didn't have an option. I
You
did
don't have
have to.
yeah.
I didn't have an option. They would prefer, and I've given trainings in French, and it's been very draining.
Yeah. I
Is
mean, I get
is
mocked for my Hindi in Bombay all the time. That's why I don't come there anymore. Like the cab guy's laughing all the time. I'm like, dude, it's I need to go to Lower Parel. How do I get there?
as if people from Bombay speak Shuddh Hindi. Even we butchered Hindi to a different
Absolutely.
level.
In fact, I never had an issue in Delhi. Like Delhi people are like, yeah, poor thing. But like my Bombay friends, like, for instance, there's bhaiya and bhaiya, right? And I can't say bhaiya like all the time. I made a big effort to say it now, but I keep saying bhaiya, and they're like, "You're calling your maid or what?" I'm like, I didn't know all this. Then so there are certain within the intra-cultural mockings as well. I mean,
But it is much more comfortable. It's like your brother mocking, as
yeah, I
opposed
mean,
to somebody from
yeah,
outside.
yeah, I think because, see, you're right. It is, of course, more comfortable, but
Hmm,
at the same time, if it's done repeatedly, it feels like bullying, right? You know what I mean? If it's done for no reason,
hmm,
but at the same time, this was done in good, not with any sort of malice intended. But
hmm,
I can sense what it's like on an international scale. It's not your fellow countrymen or countrywomen, and
hmm,
it's being done repeatedly when you're at a university sort of level, where you're at your formative years. You're already like, oh my god, what am I doing? Where am I? Who am I?
hmm.
And then these jabs being taken, and I don't think it's intentional. I think everyone does it across. If a Frenchman comes to India and tries to learn things, I mean, we've all made fun, like, oh, look in whatever, right? I think, and as you mentioned, the reason I'm sort of going off topic, maybe not, is with this idea of language. It's such a powerful tool that gives people a sense of belonging to a certain group, that if you take that away, it's almost like, whoa, who are we, right?
Yes, it takes away a sense of identity.
Yeah.
And like I mentioned, that's what many colonizers did in
Mm.
order to this idea of civilizing people, and that idea ingrained in us. That
Hmm.
idea got ingrained in us. That idea of, firstly, of course, beauty standards,
Mm.
the way you speak, what constitutes for you being educated, uneducated, cultured, uncultured. All of that
Mm.
started changing. And yes, people overcompensate, but one must also remember, you overcompensate when things have been overbearing for you.
Absolutely. Yeah, I
So you
totally agree with that. Yeah.
keep pushing further when it's been overbearing for you.
Hmm.
And it's always easy, it's not easy to blame, but it's human to blame, right?
Yeah.
So you start blaming um, different groups or different aspects that you think must have affected. And interculturalists must feel that they have an answer to this, right?
Yeah.
That, okay,
Yeah.
it's because of this reason. Historians feel that, okay, no, this is the reason.
Politicians
Biologists
use
feel
that as a
differently.
vulnerable access point to exploit and divide.
They divide, basically, in different ways.
Yeah. No, I really find it quite remarkable because just talking to you and from our last call as well,
Hmm,
I'm a product of this, and I'm not saying a successful product of this, but there's this sense, and you're right, it happens on an individual level when there's someone who's made you feel like shit for who you are. Your
hmm,
automatic thing is to harp on those points and then overcompensate for it, right? Saying, "Hey, you said
hmm,
this about me, now look at me," and you
hmm,
magnify that on a national or a societal scale.
hmm,
It's I'm not, and this none of this comes from a point of saying this is bad or good, but I
hmm,
feel this is a situation we're living in right now, especially with the internet and social media, where people are clustering to like-minded groups, right? And groups
hmm,
which are representing one aspect of the human being, which may be food or maybe music or maybe religion, maybe political ideology. And as a result, they kind of forsake what the other 99 things out of the 100 that goes into making them. And as a
hmm,
result, they become very rigid. And I know you can't use these words, you'd rather not use these words, but I've noticed through conversations, whether it's Indians living in America or whether it's someone who's fighting for certain rights in a certain society, is
hmm,
all these things are cultural, of course, right? And not
hmm,
one yet all are cultural in their own right. But you kind of have this conversation where instead of saying, okay, these are the things that affect me and I'm going to deal with it on a personal level, then sort of look outward, they automatically blame multiple things, whether it's establishments in society or certain ways, say for instance the patriarchy, or for instance
hmm,
it's authority. And I'm going across this, not just specific to India. This could be what's happening with Black Lives Matter, it could be what's happening with Me Too, it's happening with, say for instance, the this for what do you call that, the um, labor movements in certain countries. It's happening, and it's happening simultaneously on a much larger scale in my observation right now at this point in time. So
hmm.
what do you sense? Like, I don't have a question for it, but do you?
Yeah, I think social media has also given a platform for people to, um, search for other people who think like them.
Mm,
Right? It's just people who think like you have just become more accessible.
yeah,
So
that's true. Yeah.
the change is not that people have started to change the way they think. It's just
Mm,
that they're able to group much more efficiently
yeah.
now. So there have always been people who thought like that. It's just that now that you have a person who thinks like you think, when a culture is basically people who think similarly coming together. If you think your voice is getting stronger, you're going
Mm.
to speak much more louder.
Absolutely. I think earlier you were just that random person in class, and I was like, dude, what's wrong with you? How can you think like that?
Yes,
Now,
but now I know somebody else in some other state of some other country, or
yeah,
some other even rural area or a small village that
yeah,
thinks like me, and I have a platform, I have a podium almost in
yeah.
order to propagate what I think. So
It's amazing how when someone who's seen as culturally oppressed, right, when you give
mm,
them enough power, they end up becoming the same person they were complaining against. You know,
mm,
you see these people go. I don't say these and them and all these whatever various terms to separate, but like the same person saying, "Oh, I was mocked for what I eat," and now they have a group of people who eat the same thing. They mock others for what they eat. I mean, I'm like, how can you do that? Coming from a
There
place where
has
you
to be
already,
some balance, no?
yeah, like, I mean, I noticed this with the vegans, right? Like, they're like, oh, we don't get vegan options in any restaurant or whatever, right? And next
Yeah.
thing, when everything's given and a bunch of vegans together, they make fun of people like, how can they eat chicken? I'm like, dude, why, right? You know why you're doing this, but you want people to just be accepted for what they choose to eat. So can't we just say, okay, let's move on from here to the next thing? But it's
I-
a
this is
repeating
usually the
cycle.
power of numbers, though.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
will see that happening when, there is a larger group of individuals who think similarly and a smaller group of individuals who think similarly. The people who are more are going to be louder, are going to um, feel that they have more
Mm,
authority to impose their thoughts
right.
on you. So it's
Yeah,
also a matter of numbers that happens, because
absolutely.
um, the same person who asked you about the Ganges or asked you about the snakes
Yeah.
may not do that if he comes to India, may not do that if he
I
ever
doubt,
visits
you
India. It's
know,
the power of numbers.
I think strangely that person was French.
Ah
Um,
ouais.
in the sense, many times removed from France, but they were the Lamarches. And I was almost, and see, now if you also put me in that situation, I'm aware that the name Lamarche means swamp. So I could have come up with a
Mm.
rebuttal, which would have been even more cool to the Ganges joke, saying, yeah, I might have been in the Ganges, boy, in a Southern American accent. I might have been in the Ganges, boy, but at least I'm not from the swamps or something. But no, I was just like, ha ha ha, very funny, white man. But
Only if you knew earlier.
only that, and I think that's I don't want to bring in comedy into this, but that's what comedy does, whether it's the comedy of Russell Peters or Dave Chappelle. Very, very culturally significant, right? With what they
Hmm.
do is by softening these cultural crossovers. And that's why I tell my friends and tell some people sometimes, I mean, there's no reason why Indians should only love Indian comedians, or French people should only love French comedy or French literature, because the idea of a good artist, whether it's in any medium, is
Hmm.
to break those cultural barriers and bring you to that cultural plane of their context. And that's what Dave Chappelle does. He talks about inner city Chicago, about a black baby in a neighborhood as he calls it, the ghetto. Number one, I've never been to a ghetto. I've never been, with a black baby in that situation. But why am I laughing? Because it's so well done. And I think that's the
Hmm.
beauty of
It
something like comedy.
resonates.
Yeah, it resonates on so many levels, which are human and not just cultural.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I find that very interesting. And is that something that you use when it comes to bridging certain cultural gaps? If that's even a right word.
I Since we're talking about popular culture and people like Russell Peters and Dave Chappelle,
Hmm.
I have used popular culture as references
Okay.
to give an idea also of the history of India.
Hmm.
Okay? Because eventually art is a reflection of what society's culture is at the moment.
Hmm.
So it's going to be exactly what you want it to be. Like, it communicates exactly what society is.
Yeah.
And we've seen that with Bollywood as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Eventually, if you see the stories that were there before,
Yeah.
in Bollywood, there's a bad guy. And this was when India was much more socialist. And, there's
Mm.
a bad guy out there, and he has the power and he's a central authority. And there's a
Mm.
poor man who's going against that authority, because in those
Mm.
times,
Right.
in the 70s, 80s, that was the pattern, that was the
Like the
culture.
zamindar and the land and the farmer.
Land,
Right. Right. Right.
exactly.
Right. Right.
And then eventually we did move on to large in the 90s, post liberalization. You
Mm.
move into Karan Johar movies,
Mm.
larger than life hero,
Ah.
not really fighting an authority that is the government or a zamindar or a factory owner who's benefiting from capitalism.
Mm.
Rather, the hero himself is a capitalist who owns
Yeah.
so many things, who is has much more money to travel,
Living the fantasy life, right?
living
Yeah.
the fantasy life.
Dancing in
And
castles and
yes,
every 2 seconds a song in the meadows, kind of thing. Right. 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 No, it's true. But how do they arrive at that? Right. It's almost like you're going into escapism at that point, which I think also reflects on a situation where
yes,
Yeah.
like I said, it's a reflection, because at that time your culture becomes that of aspiration.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because in the 90s it was all about the aspiration. It
Yeah.
was about, living the max capitalist life of having money, of uh, you know students joining engineering in order to earn money, people moving
Mm.
abroad. So it was just a reflection of aspiration.
In that case, we're living in pretty crap times because we're living in the era of reality TV. So that's really scary. That means everyone, and I think there's that sense where social media gives you this notion where you are the celebrity, you are the hero, you can do whatever with your potential. And that I think is great. I think it's a
Yeah,
great thing.
and now
People,
we're coming to that. Gen Z is
yeah,
coming to that. So
yeah,
if you've seen certain Instagram ads, so now, there were certain Instagram influencers who were
mm,
relatively small before, but now have a huge following.
yeah,
And they have huge billboards,
wow,
in Mumbai. So
mm,
now it's become that a person who's normal,
mm,
who does not have a life that's like that of Shah Rukh Khan in
mm,
probably Kabhi Khushi Kabhi Gum, is
yeah,
still having success, being himself or
right,
herself, or not necessarily having that capitalist aspiration, but still having
yeah.
fame, for example,
But what I don't
as
get,
a
and
trade-off.
correct me if I'm wrong, because it's maybe my bias or my uninformed opinion,
Hmm,
when you call these people influencers, right? And
hmm,
say they
hmm,
might be an influencer for being, say, fitness instructors on Instagram, right? And they get really popular for these fitness tips, or say someone who's doing really good makeup
hmm,
tutorials or a mock a parody videos, whatever, right?
hmm,
And then they get really big for that, and the
hmm,
next thing you know, they're across the industry for various things. Suddenly they're doing ads for some children's mind development sort of programs. Then they're doing stuff for like the health shoes. So what I mean is, these are people who are good for one particular thing that got them there, and now you're
hmm,
taking them in this context of an influencer, and brands are just asking them to project all sorts of things. From a cultural point of view,
hmm,
it's is it healthy? Because let me give you an example. I like, say, Virat Kohli is a really good cricketer, and his
hmm,
ethic as a sportsman is fantastic. He's a good leader. He knows how his team should work. He's really disciplined as an athlete. Excellent, right?
hmm,
Now, if you get him as that influencer, right? And say, okay, these are certain things that we want you to promote. Okay, do one as a brand ambassador. I understand that's money and that's how the game works, and I'm not taking away from that. But do you think when these guys and girls and people are putting across these messages culturally and people are buying into it, uh,
hmm.
is it healthy, unhealthy? What happens as a result when um, billions or millions of kids say that this is my aspiration? Is that culturally? I mean, I don't know if this
I
is right or wrong, but
it's there's no right or wrong,
mm,
firstly. And I think it's always been there.
mm,
Again, the medium has changed.
okay,
Shah Rukh or Virat, or even Amitabh Bachchan, for that matter, for an older audience, they've always been brand ambassadors. They've always used their platform. They've always used their fame
mm.
in order to influence.
I feel, see, earlier it was strictly advertising, and of course, I'm not saying social media is the culprit, and it's been there forever, right? If you're good at something, of course, a famous person walking in a suit will make you the. I'm talking now, the reach is so much more beyond just being
This
seen in an ad. Like they're not just doing a 30-seconder for, say, Parker pen or for a Hyundai car or whatever. It's a lot more pervasive, if that's the right way
I think
to.
the sense of responsibility now
Mm.
has increased with these influencers,
Which
right?
is, I think, a
Because
good thing, right?
it's a good thing. They
Mm.
should be having that sense of responsibility. Not
Right.
everybody does, because most of these influencers are also very young.
Absolutely. That's sort of what I was
Yes.
trying to get to in a very roundabout fashion.
Like, you don't want to offend the young people who are listening to
I
this.
don't
That
think they listen. I think that's
you're
the thing with
young, you're
youngsters.
stupid.
Yeah.
No.
No, they don't listen. I think many of them just be like, you know what? I'm just going to say it. I want people to listen to me. And I think that's absolutely
Yeah.
fine. I think we have a great youth movement. Anyway, we'll talk about that later.
Yeah, so with Gen Z also, I feel there's, like, from millennials, which was more about the individual. And I think the kind of influencers, and this is my personal opinion, I
Mm,
usually have a problem is are the millennials. Because
mm,
I think the millennial generation as a culture was very individualistic. It was
okay.
about, getting yourself ahead, being that founder who changed or disrupted the market.
Yeah. Oh,
You know,
those are millennials. So millennial is what?
those,
People in their 30s now?
yes, people are that are there in their 30s now. They're
Hey,
born in the late. Are you a
uh,
millennial?
I don't know. I'm born in the early 80s. This is, yeah, I don't know. I don't know what I qualify as,
So
but
it's a late, if I'm not wrong, it's the late 80s to 2000s.
oh, no, no, no. I'm not one of those millennials. I'm
You're
one
not
of those
one of.
confused ones between the alphabets. I squeezed within the cracks.
So you're a gen between a Gen X and a millennial. You're
See,
you're in that generation.
my generation is totally a generation effed. We don't know what we
You're the
are.
dial-up generation, you know.
Oh God, yeah, yeah, okay. But I'm actually proud of that generation because we had patience to pursue our dreams that connect. Did you say dial up? Dial up, right?
Dial-up,
Yeah,
yes.
that's exactly what we were. We were the BSNL generation.
I think every generation feels that way also, you know, that,
True,
oh,
but when we
we
wanted
gave you
something
all
desperately,
Facebook.
true, but I suppose it's a different kind of frustration, right? But ours was
Mm,
literally waiting for that one thing to load, and then your mom picks up the phone, and you're like, oh, yeah. So disappointment manifested in different ways.
different way.
But yeah, I get this sense, of,
Mm,
and to bring it back to this point, when we look at certain aspects of certain, let's call it societies, right? Like say
mm,
American work culture, like the nine, or say European work culture, right? In America, they would work relentlessly. There's no such thing, 90-hour weeks, and whereas I've heard like in Europe, if you take your work back home, that is frowned upon or whatever they call it.
mhm,
We've sort of taken the worst from many places.
mhm.
I used to work in IT, and I remember I used to go late in according to my parents, right? Because my dad would go to the factory by 7:30, he'd be out of the house, but I would wake up by the time I work out, eat breakfast, go to work at like 9:45, 10:30, and my mom's like, "What, with this kind of work ethic, you'll never be anyone in this world." Kind of leave the house with
Mm,
that kind of
mm.
parting words. Then I would be at work and not really work, but just switch on my computer. And then people would land up at 11, then chai, and then foosball. And actually work would start for them at 1:30 with the first call. Now, by say 9 hours, 10 hours later, or whatever, by 6, I'm ready to leave. They're like,
Mm,
no, 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 now the client, something's deliverable. This. I'm like, dude, you had the entire sort of 7 hours to talk to me.
yeah.
But that's what I mean. That's one very small example. Maybe it's trivial.
This
But
was with the Indian work culture you were saying
yeah,
that
yeah,
you're
yeah,
talking about. Okay.
yeah,
Yes. Yes. This is what happened. This is another issue that comes up between Franco-Indian teams
mm,
is the, there, especially with French team, it's a huge difference. Just to give you a cultural context to this, and probably you'll agree with me or not.
mm,
In Hinduism is a big part of our culture, accept it or deny it. We have many religions. We live cordially, at least
yeah,
we try.
yeah,
But Hinduism is a big part of our culture. And there's a concept in Buddhism as well. It's called samsara.
mm,
That is, time is cyclical
yeah,
for Indians. Your life, you have multiple lives.
yeah.
Time is never ending.
And life is the idea of life is to break that
Yeah,
cycle eventually, right? Yeah.
yes. But but your concept is of time is very cyclical, whereas for a person from, you say, France or Germany,
Yeah.
it's linear.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
a starting point and there's an ending point. So
Yeah.
time is finite.
Mm,
So you look and perceive time in that way.
mm,
So the way Indians also work is, when it comes with respect to time, or if it's being invited somewhere,
yeah.
there's always going to be a flexibility.
So are
People
you saying
are
it's
at
that
it.
inherent, that deeply it's
That's one
in
of
us?
the reasons. See, that's one of the
Right.
reasons. The
No, it
other
makes
is,
sense because like if I
yes,
can't make the meeting in this life,
maybe next life.
I don't know if it's that simple, but I mean, if that is the case, then we're really more
Yeah.
profound than people give us credit for. Like, what's the
Or it's
point?
that cow
Yeah.
on the road that's blocking the traffic. you know
Right. So you're saying that rooted, that particular sense, which is so deeply rooted in our belief, in our
in our
philosophy,
belief,
yeah,
yes.
is manifesting in these trivial ways, going, it's okay, a little bit
Yes.
okay,
And we take that for granted. We
right,
take so many of these things for granted,
yeah.
like,
Which I think is a great thing. I mean, I don't mistake me. I'm not saying that the French are right or the US are the Americans are wrong.
hmm,
I'm
hmm,
just talking about this observation where we seem to pick and choose, whether it's even say with consumerism, right?
hmm,
Now, there are certain things that we're proud of. Like, I think the Indian diet in many ways was balanced, right? We
Hmm.
would get sweets in a certain time of the year. We would fast during, say, a certain phase of the moon. We would balance our diet with the four things, which is sour, sweet, salt, and spice.
Mm-hmm.
And those things were there, and they were sort of passed on verbally in a form of recipes or whatever the story might be from generation to generation. I feel, in some sense, now with capitalism, which I think is great as well, it's important. Now you have the likes of the Swiggies and the Dunzos. I mean, everything comes with a balance, right? But I feel we're tilting more towards um, this American way of consumerism, with the credit card, with the debt, living from paycheck to paycheck, where we have, I wouldn't say forgotten our roots, because I don't think there's anything called forgotten. I think we just move on with time. But this sense of our numbers, with 7 billion people, with a disparity, and you throw in this new ingredient to the recipe, I just feel it's a little bit more chaotic, and the balance is shifting more towards this.
Hmm. I think this perspective is also very urban, you know.
Yeah.
I think because
Yeah.
it's urban, and there are many papers and studies that have been done on this, that
Okay.
all urban countries in the world have similarities.
Mm.
So we say it's that it's reflecting the United States, but if you go around the world, if you go to Paris,
Mm.
it's similar. It's only that they're always usually home on time
Yeah.
compared to Bombay, for example. Yeah,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
there is always going to be that similarity. And about the working culture and our where consumerism is heading,
Mm.
I think India and is also largely agrarian.
Mm.
Right?
Mm. Right.
So when it started moving away from that and moving into IT services and into the service industry,
Mm.
it was mostly post liberalization when companies started coming in.
Yeah.
So, there's an influx of companies from the United States and, the UK, not as much from Europe, but
Yeah.
more so from, the United States or the
Absolutely.
United Kingdom. So the only way in which you could pick up a work culture was a reflection of these companies that are coming in and are setting
Yeah.
up businesses and giving us jobs and giving us money and kind of augmenting the economy. So
Which I
you
think is great.
you
I mean, I
adjust
don't.
to that.
You're absolutely, and I think that's all fine. I mean, I wasn't taking a pot shot at any of these things.
Oh, no, no.
Yeah, I'm just
Yeah,
talking
it's
about
just the
this
reasoning
idea.
of it.
Yeah,
Yes.
no, when you sort of also like look at these situations now, when a lot of people and I come completely from an urban point of view. I think I should put
Hmm.
that out there, because I've only known urban life,
Yeah, same. Yeah.
right? So what was quite remarkable though, which also comes with issues, is when
Hmm.
people are, they're moving out of their homes from across the country, coming to, say, Bangalore or Bombay. They
Hmm.
bring their own sort of nuances, their perception on how things are in
Hmm.
life, how it is to date, how it is to party, how it is to chill, how it is to... So then what happens
Hmm.
is, especially you see sometimes in Bangalore, a lot of people are like, oh, what about the Kannadigas, what about our language? And I'm sure this
Yeah.
is on across countries, across societies, across things, right?
Hmm.
What is happening to our thing. And of course, in Bombay as well, there are groups that are trying to hold on to their state pride or their thing, right? So
Mhm.
you see this, but I think the idea of the melting pot, right? And
Hmm.
which is so important if it's done well. And I don't think one person can say how it should be done. But you go, like, when I do comedy shows, the reason I can do comedy shows, for many reasons, and for more frequently than earlier, say like in 1990s Bangalore,
Hmm.
which of course can be perceived as more tolerant. Everyone was Bangalorean primarily before their religion or their group, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
We would not say, oh, are you Punjabi first? I'll be like, oh, you're a Bangalorean friend. And I literally mean it from that point. We didn't care where we would eat. We would eat like a roll at a place called Nizam's. We would eat a burger. We would eat ice cream. We would drink coffee. We didn't have the coffee days or the Starbucks or any of these brand chains, but we would go do
Hmm.
our things, which of course is a very urban thing again. But
Yes.
what I sense now is you meet people who are from such diverse backgrounds, who speak Dutch,
Yes.
different languages, and it's beautiful. As a comedian, I wouldn't be able to do shows 10 times a week, because I wouldn't say homogenous, but like in a Bangalore of the 90s, I could probably do one show because I would know everyone there, right? Then they're
I
like,
grew up with that guy. I went to college with
it
that
literally
guy.
was like that. It still is
Yeah.
6 schools, 6 degrees, or 6 schools. If you went to these 6 schools and at
Yes.
any point in time in that batch, you would know these people.
Hmm.
You would know pretty much as they would call it, the old Bangalore, and maybe similarly in Bombay. But
Mm.
now I can go to certain parts of Bangalore and I'm like, whoa, where the hell am I, right? Which I think is remarkable. It's a little disconcerting, I'd be honest, because I'm like, will they get
Mm.
my jokes? Because when I go for, like, say, a show past, say, in an area in Bangalore called Koromangala somewhere,
Mm.
and I'm just like, man, um, I asked the client, like, what's the language which is preferred? And they're like, yeah, everyone speaks English, but they don't think in English. I'm like, ooh. And I feel literally like I'm doing a gig in Gurgaon, which I think it's not a bad thing, but I'm just like, okay, let me do that set I did in Gurgaon. And it actually, sometimes in Gurgaon,
That
the people are from
resonates.
Bangalore and they're like, can you do one bit line in Kannada? I'm like, dude, are you crazy? I don't get slippered, dude. So I'm just thinking out loud, right? Because these are things I would like to run by you as a guy who's performed in different things, of course, as a comedian. But it's
Yes.
beautiful that this we spoke about this on the call, right? With the
Mm.
idea of the internet is to reach multiple people across the globe.
Mm.
And some people are like, but why would you want to do that? Why don't you just do Kannada comedy, and that way you can reach Kannadigas across the globe? Of course, to each his own. That's their preference, right?
Mm.
But I think this is the power of the internet, and that entire idea of the world is flat in that context, where you can have perception on what's going on around you in the world as an English speaking Indian. And I
Mm.
think I would like to also maybe hear a English speaking Russian share his or her points of view on various things going around. And I think topics and the premises are only finite, whether it's
Mm.
social issues like gender, whether it's sexuality, whether it's progress, employment, etc., the family, all these things. And
Yes.
I think that's the beauty of the internet. Is like, I'd love to hear, like, someone like Pratha, who's an intercultural sitting in Bombay, her point of view on on things happening in her world and also in the world at large. I don't think just because I'm an Indian, but say as an Egyptian, something, whatever it may be, right? So, do you sense that is happening with the internet, or is it becoming more cliquish, or whatever the word?
I think with the internet now, there's this word that keeps coming also, keeps coming up in pitches. If you're in marketing, it's about being relatable.
Yeah, oh, yeah. uh,
I'm sure you know.
oh,
So
no, no, I've
when
been
you
thrown that. Sandeep, could you think about making a podcast relatable? I'm like, what is
relatable,
that? No, I don't like relation.
exactly, you don't like relation.
Just I'll play anyone.
So it's what is relatability?
Yeah.
Right? It's having to resonate with a large group of people.
Mm,
Now the way you're going to resonate can be in a very homogeneous way
mm,
that's going to get through to a Russian guy probably sitting in Egypt, or to a guy from Gurgaon sitting in Bangalore,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
It can be that, and then you create this huge subculture of Sandeep Rao that everybody is relating to.
Mm,
Or you are more specific and are
mm,
relatable, just like you said, to the to a Kannadiga person,
yeah,
or for a person from Bombay or Mumbai, somebody who's from Maharashtra.
yeah, yeah.
The thing is that I have a feeling it's never going to be homogeneous, even if
Yeah.
we are getting so connected because of the internet. It's not going to be homogeneous because people are too insecure to give up their individuality in that
Yeah.
sense. And that
Okay.
individuality comes, a huge part of your individuality is your culture. A huge part of individuality is where you grew up. That becomes also a part of your
Mm,
culture. So I don't think it's ever going to be that you will be able to do the same content all over and be relatable to millions of people at once,
yeah.
because everybody is going to want to relate to you from a perspective that is
Yeah.
important to them.
I think
And
that's very true. I think there's no one. I think just like what you mentioned, you can't do the same content, right?
hmm,
Because jokes themselves or material themselves have cultural subtexts, which a person wouldn't get just by virtue of not being in that context, right?
hmm,
But what I feel is by virtue of the same thing not applying, by same content not working, is also that you can be relatable. When I mean relatable, is you can be the same person. The material can sort of vary based on certain differences, but I
hmm,
think because by virtue of fact that human beings aren't static, they're constantly
hmm,
discovering themselves. I think a person you might do a show for who might be like, oh, I only want to hear Hindi comedy, right? Say, for example, or I
Hmm.
like only Bollywood music or only Hindi Netflix web series.
Hmm.
Maybe in 10, 15 years, he or she might be like, you know what, that was a phase in my life and I really loved it, but now I really like
I've evolved
spirituality.
from that.
Yeah, I really like exploring other aspects, and I think that's the beauty of
Hmm.
any of these things. And I think we kind of lose idea of that, is that we might be here for only 60, 70 years, and philosophies determine whether it's linear or cyclical. But I
Hmm.
think human behavior is so unpredictable, and so that's why people are trying to grab onto that 5 minutes of their attention, because they don't know what's next, you know.
Things keep changing by the minute because of the
Yeah,
internet as well. And
yeah.
what is popular and not popular gets determined by the second now,
By the
you
second,
know.
yeah. And I think that's a desperate that kind of grasping at straws marketing thing, right? Like, oh, if you're
Hmm.
not clickbaity titles, or if you haven't got them in the first 3 seconds, you've lost them forever. I don't think so. And I'll be honest, whoever's listening to this probably has heard me go on about this, and they want to hear you, and I will come back to you. I say this all the time. Like, I've been doing comedy for 11 years without marketing in its sort of purest sense. I haven't got an agency. I haven't got a PR team. I'm not
Hmm.
famous on social media. I don't post. I don't know how to post on social media. After like 3 times posting, I'm like, dude, the hashtags, the captions, I can't do it. It's too irritating. So, and it literally means that I'm not living example, or I'm not tooting my own horn, but you can do it if you really like doing something. And
Hmm.
there is, I think, an importance to that in a cultural scenario, where if you tell people that be comfortable doing what you like because you enjoy it, as opposed to the byproducts, and I don't get to any particular space or field of work, that you really can sustain what you enjoy doing over a course of time, because you don't have to fall for this trap where
Hmm.
it's getting the I mean, relatability is a much more important thing than just to be popular. I think it's nice to be recognized for people saying, oh, I like hearing her because she speaks about stuff that I'm thinking about as well. And I think that's a
Hmm.
very good human thing, as opposed to a branding activity. You know what I mean? But
Yes.
okay, since we're on that topic, I, I I hear this a lot, and I don't want to again go down this rabbit hole of them versus us. But why are we hearing more and more of this word or this term called cultural appropriation? And since it's relatability, maybe this will be the topic of the podcast episode. Pratha Shetty on cultural appropriation and how Americans are total bastards.
Yes, you should quote me on that.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
kidding.
Just to make sure
I'm
your
going to lose
career,
my job after this. I have
just
a
to, just to
feeling.
give you a career boost.
Thank you. Thank you so much. No
Anytime.
regrets.
No, no, I
Yes.
won't call it that. Don't worry.
No, no. So, I think because since, like, we discussed before, people are finding their voices with what their identity is
Mm,
culturally.
right.
And that also automatically translates into that I have the authority over this.
Mm,
Nobody else can do it right. Okay.
okay.
That's one part of it.
So that's projection almost, right?
That's projection in a
Right.
sense.
Right.
But then there have also been times where people have benefited out of somebody's culture without
Mm,
giving them credit.
mm.
So
Can you give
it
me an example, just to put it in
Yes.
context?
So for example, I don't want to name brands, but there was a fashion show that happened where the attire looked very ethnically Indian,
Okay.
and there was a white male model who was
Mm,
wearing it
mm,
along with a turban. So, it was depicting, in a sense, the man was depicting a Sikh, a person who's
ah,
Sikh would wear that attire.
okay.
So that, in a sense, is taking away an opportunity
Right. So your
from
argument would be, why couldn't they get a Sikh man to fill that role,
fill
or
that
to
role,
wear the thing which is his attire? Right.
which is his attire, because it's also religious. Right?
Right.
You are eventually going to be selling this probably for
Right.
thousands of dollars.
So just to, okay, on the flip side to that,
Yes,
would so then it's in that line of thinking, a Sikh person can get absolutely upset if someone just wore a khada without understanding the significance of it, right?
significance of it. Or if you're, wearing a kada and are profiting out of it. I think that
Okay, the
is,
profiting part is a very important thing.
yes.
Okay.
There's another example which was a little more personal to me. So there was a small restaurant in the city where I lived in Normandy called Caen.
Oh, you were in
And
Normandy. Okay.
yes, I was in
I have a friend
Normandy.
over there. He was quite big back in the day. William?
Okay.
William, they call him the Conqueror or something like that. Yeah.
But he wasn't there when I was
Many
there.
years back. Yeah. We were in class together.
Not a millennial, I'm
No,
assuming.
but just different millennia.
So yeah, there's a small restaurant there. So they also did serve Indian food,
Hmm.
and they named a burger Ganesha burger, and that
Ooh.
it
Okay.
gets better. And
Okay.
the burger had beef in it.
Ooh. Man, okay.
So I'm not
That's
extremely
just
doing.
no. I think that's just stupid.
Yes.
Because that's not even considerate. Like it's like calling it like the, I'm going to say it out there because I'm disabled. No one can come after me. But it's like calling a carpenter shop the Jesus shop or something, right? You wouldn't you do something just to hurt someone. You'd say something like that just to hurt someone, right?
Look, maybe that wasn't intentional. Maybe that was out of pure ignorance or,
I don't think so,
lack
because you know
of.
what? I think that's if you're making an effort to go to that extent, and like I just said this now, and I didn't mean it to hurt any Christian person listening to it,
Hmm,
but it's a joke, and as a comedian, maybe someone would say that's you're going too far. But the
hmm,
point is, okay, I knew that Jesus was a carpenter, and irony that these things happened in his life, and of course, I don't take away from the power that the Son of God has had on people, but
hmm.
this is also maybe as insensitive, going, someone had it as a laugh, going, Ganesha burger, like, oh my god, what do you get in it, right? Like, if you actually were well informed,
Mm.
you wouldn't do it, because this just seems like a really lazy attempt at getting that basic tourist, and you wouldn't get the person or even the Frenchman or anyone to eat that, because it just doesn't seem. Maybe even someone be right now fuming, going, how could he do that Jesus thing?
Hmm.
And I apologize, right? Because if I was setting an example to contrast for this, it just seems like a really lazy attempt at branding,
Hmm. And
which, yeah,
and that's what usually, when people are blamed for cultural appropriation, that's
yeah,
what is usually happening. Even if it's not profiteering out of something,
yeah,
it can also be that, just to give you an example, if a black person
mm,
was wearing his or her hair a
yeah,
certain way before,
yeah,
they would be called unprofessional.
in an afro or whatever the
In
traditional
an
style is,
afro or
right?
braids, or
Yeah,
there were times where that would be unprofessional, and
yeah.
only a straight hair would be
Ah,
actually
correct.
considered professional.
Yeah,
But then next day I see probably a white man in a suit and dreadlocks
yeah,
coming to office, and not facing the same things that a black person has faced,
yeah.
coming
I
in that
get what you mean.
hair.
I get
Yeah,
what you
so
mean.
that's also, then that also becomes a matter of privilege. So
Yeah.
you extract from my culture, you
Mm.
take things,
You
you
pick
pick
and
and
choose.
choose,
Yeah.
you
Mm.
pick and choose things from my culture, in a sense benefit out of it, or
Mm.
not get singled out because of it, but then I am,
Yeah.
then there is a disparity, then you're using my culture incorrectly, or I
Or
am not
rather,
able
I'm not able to
to.
use my culture.
Yes,
Yeah, for
I'm
what
not
I.
able
Yeah.
to use my culture for just it being my culture.
Which is, I think,
Mm.
total. I think that's the problem now, and I think, as you mentioned a while back on, that's why people now are kind of more in your face about it, going, you know what, I wasn't
Mm.
allowed to do this all these years, and one or certain members of society were allowed to, so I'm now going to push back. That's why the pushback's that much harder, I feel.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
It's
Let me
more
give you an
like it's
example, okay?
overbearing. Yes.
I want you to break it down with your cultural hat on. I was asked to do an ad for Raymond's, the suit company. By the way, I should probably be a little careful dropping brands in case they
Names
won't
like
sponsor.
that.
I have
You
really
could have made money out of
no
this, but then
aspirations as a
Sandeep,
podcaster, right? Like, Sandeep, where are your endorsements? Oh yeah, that's important.
I just want to talk.
Yeah, and I think I'll find the right sponsor to endorse me, if and when. But they asked me to do an ad, and it was called the Raymond Black Collection.
Mhm.
Now, they wanted me to come on board as a visually impaired person, because the suit is so black, it's almost dark, right? So I thought that was cool. I said, by the way, guys, um, maybe, as someone, and I know you're laughing, but this was the pitch. And then the next day, they're like, no, we can't get you because you're not blind enough.
Oh, la la.
And anyone listening apparently there is an ad out. They've got a guy
Who's blind?
Who's blind. And it's out apparently in theaters. And apparently, it's very, I'm so glad that a guy more blind than me got it, right? This is my first thing. But apparently he doesn't fit well in the suit. Now, my question to anyone is it, and I'm not, by any way, I'm not a model. And this is now probably like this guy has done a Jesus joke. Now he's saying he's a hot model. No, none of that. It's just, I found it hilarious seeing the lawyers found you not blind enough for this ad. And okay, let me tell you one more thing since we're on this topic.
Yeah.
I was asked to do this podcast. Here, I don't want to drop names because the person might be hearing this. And it was about a perspective on life as a blind guy, right? So the podcast was called The Blind, blah, blah, blah. And the guy wanted me to do this podcast. He said, I want you to share your stories. I want you to share your perception, your journey, your experience. I don't use the word perception or perspective too much. I already have. So he said, I want you to do this podcast. And I said, dude, no, I don't like the terms on which you've sort of trying to get me on this podcast. And then he said a line which I find really, I wouldn't say offensive, but really crass. He goes, buddy, remember this. I can always get some guy to wear sunglasses and pretend he's blind. I don't need you. And I was like, ooh.
Ouch.
Ooh, that's, in my head going, you can't pull that off in today's day and age because number one, you just said that to me and I can go repeat it. Which,
like you are now.
Yeah, exactly.
Just
And
tell us the name, Sandeep.
I mean, the thing is, man, that
Kidding.
guy is, he's up his own ass, like he thinks that he knows everything. And that's a lot of times with producers. But I don't know. So when you heard both stories, you don't know me that well. And we've got to know each other over the past two conversations. But which of the two did you find cultural appropriation, if that's a word, or inappropriate? Cultural inappropriation.
I think this is purely a matter of privilege and marginalizing. Usually people who are considered marginalized, everybody thinks that they're doing them a favor, right? You are going to be in a Raymond ad. So here is a favor from us, the privileged, to you who would have
But don't you
otherwise not
think the
gotten an
fact that they didn't
opportunity.
get me on because I was not blind enough was a good thing, that they gave someone more blind than me?
More blind, so somebody else got an
Yeah,
opportunity.
he said you, and I said, okay, will you ever
let's
be
let's
coming
give a
up with?
more marginalized person this
Correct.
opportunity as
I mean,
opposed
I'd love
to.
it if they're like, you know what, Sandeep, now we got a perfect suit. It's gray. It's like kind of neither.
So it's perfect for you. So we are
Yeah.
selecting appropriately.
So I can easily be like, you know what, this is discrimination. But I don't want, I mean, obviously I'm not going to do it. But this is where I have a problem, right? Now, someone, what was the thing which recently happened? The Fab India thing with the Urdu thing. And my point is, okay, is this something which, because it's of course Hindu Muslim there, but I don't give a shit, right? I had a good laugh. My wife's like, dude, are you serious? And it was funny.
Yes.
You're having a laugh. I think it's a great story. But someone like who was in my situation could have made it a big deal, which I don't think is required. I think it's silly, it's inappropriate. I don't know if, because nowadays more and more of these situations are being blown out of proportion, which I find a little ridiculous. I think some, of course, when it's marginalized and someone's sentiments and someone is being, their dignity is being violated, I think it's very important to take that into, take action against that. But sometimes I just feel that so many of these small things which happen, and if you just laugh it off, I like laughing it off. Maybe it's a personal thing, but yeah, maybe I should have done something about it now in hindsight, because clearly I don't have foresight.
At least a Facebook post about it or a tweet about it.
Well, I'm doing it on a bigger stage than that. I'm talking about it on podcast. I'm doing it on a comedy stage. Yeah. So I think I find that a better way, because like this is how
I think more than cultural appropriation, this is also the fact about tokenism, right? So here is our token, partially visually impaired guy.
Yeah.
That is out there. So what if you were this visually impaired person and they didn't mention you being visually impaired? You're a person who who's carrying on with life. Yes, you have certain probably difficulties that other people don't.
Yeah.
But what if they just approached you like that you have this platform, you are a comedian, and Raymond is approaching you?
I'd love to talk about it. In fact, that's my approach, right? Don't box anyone. And here's another thing, and I think this is very important culturally for people who are probably pondering this big dilemma or this big issue. I think if I was someone who really needed that money from the ad, and it was my means of livelihood, if I was a blind model or a partially blind model, and this was my sole source of revenue, then I would have been in a very different situation. I wouldn't have laughed about it.
Mm.
You know what I mean? Because then it becomes something that threatens my ability to earn for myself, to be someone who can fend for him or herself. I mean, himself in this case.
Mm.
But yeah, I suppose what you're saying is very true, because um, if it's the context of the conversation. Because when they come with this notion that he's blind, he'll take anything that comes in his way, that is a
Mm.
very wrong. Or anything, she's a woman, she'll take anything that comes, or she's desperate for a role. I think that's been the problem. That's been the approach. That I don't think that it's patriarchy in its true self, where it's one man. It's a bunch of
Mm.
men who've been told, you know what, they're women, they'll sleep with you for this movie, which I think is
Yes.
a total bullshit approach. And I think that needs to change, as opposed to saying all men are bad.
Mm. It's the conditioning.
The
It's the
conditioning. Yeah,
general conditioning on sometimes even women end up believing it, you know.
absolutely. It's, you mentioned this thing about how when people invaded, they were told that they're not good enough for their language, right? I think there's a
Yes.
word, that's Stockholm Syndrome, right? Which I don't know
Imposter
if it's
syndrome as
imposter
well.
syndrome, yeah.
Yeah.
And also that you're made to believe that you, or the people who are controlling you, are
Mm.
the ones, are right to do so. And and I think social conditioning is such a big mold to break out of. It's done for years. It's done across groups. It's done for boys who become men,
Mm.
who are told to be that without these kind of attributes they are not going to be men. And I
Mm.
think that is to blame as much as institutional thing. I mean, of course, who created these rules in companies? Men who preceded
Man.
other men,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
Which I think,
But
I'm
I'd
so
like
glad is
to
changing. Yeah.
add one more thing though, because social conditioning is just, it feels heavy, and it is,
Mm.
and it feels it's so difficult to undo it in
Yeah.
a short span of time. But then I also want to mention, and I'm sure not everybody will agree with me because I also
No, it's
come from
good.
a place of privilege.
It's good. It's good to have things that people don't agree
It's
with you.
not it's not that difficult.
Mm.
Just to give you an example,
Yeah.
so there was this tennis player called Lina, and she was one of the first Asians to win a Grand Slam. In 2011, she won the French Open.
Hmm.
And she not only first Asian, then she was a female as
Yeah.
well to win the Grand Slam. And after she won, it got so much coverage
Mm.
on the in media. Now, from I think in that year, there were more enrollments,
Mm.
firstly, in tennis camps.
Mm.
Secondly, there were in the top 200
Yeah.
in the world, there were more Chinese players, female Chinese players that got added to the list from
Mm.
50 to 200 after Lina won the Grand Slam and after there was media coverage, right?
Okay. Okay.
Something closer to home could also be Mary Com.
Yeah.
After Mary Com won and after Mary Com got that coverage, probably even after Priyanka Chopra did that movie,
Mm.
now we have such a strong female contingent that is representing us in
Which is
the,
amazing. I
which
think.
is
Yeah.
amazing.
I mean, I think there's a, as we've said repeatedly over the course of this conversation, there's no right, there's no wrong. It's just that
Hmm.
certain trends seem to have a bit of a, a rise and a fall. Like they're more,
Hmm.
I think, overcompensation. These are things when people, like within disability as well, more
Hmm.
about achievement sometimes is focused on people who climb mountains, people who are amputee skydivers, or people who are these amazing Paralympic because they inspire,
Hmm.
and they
It has
put,
to be an extreme exaggeration of
and I
that
think that's the,
person's
I
life.
feel sad, right? Because
Hmm.
I mean, I'm not sad for them. I think it's amazing what they've done. Each person,
Hmm.
like from these athletes to, but I feel many times while it inspires, it also gives others like, oh my
Hmm.
God, that means if I don't reach that level, I'm nothing.
I'm not,
So
yes,
yeah, it has a contrary to it.
correct. Definitely. And just representation in general also. And this, a lot of our molding, a lot of our perceptions happens as we are growing up.
Yeah.
And since we're talking about disability, there's only 3.4% representation in children's books for
Yeah.
disabled characters. Just
Well, yeah.
3.4%.
You were saying,
Right?
that representation, that I think, let's just move into this. I think this is very important. Is you say, okay,
Hmm.
one is 3.4% disability. And I
Hmm.
was telling you about Lavanya Karthik, right? Who was
Hmm.
writing about talking about this.
True.
But you have done something along these lines about women protagonists or female
Yes.
protagonists. So since you're on this, can you sort of
Yes.
go more into this?
Sure.
I
So
was thinking about a word. What is the word? I don't. Sometimes I want to use big words, and then my tongue is just like, I'm not working with you on this one. So, can you go into more detail? Is the best I can come up with at this point.
let's just say that.
Can you elaborate? That's the one.
Finally, yeah.
Finally, yeah. I'm going to edit it to make myself look good.
Yes, I shall speak further.
Yeah.
So, I'm also part of a group of individuals. I do interact with interculturalists a lot. And since the conversation is usually about culture and how much of culture we actually see, because, a lot of learning happens when learning about different cultures happen when we see them represented in different things. So it could be representation in books, it could be representation in popular media. And that's always a conversation that's happening. And, we're a group of female interculturalists. We were just speaking, and then it became personal. And then we just realized that, especially the women who, colored women who were there in the group, we realized that we've not seen people who look like us, especially in children's books. Now media is changing. So now television is changing, especially American television, or now social media has given us more access. But in children's book, we never saw women from different, firstly, cultures, and women pursuing different professions as well. So
like you were mentioning the lady, the hijabi atomic engineer, right, astrophysicist. Sorry.
Astrophysicist, yes. So Bersin Mutlu-Pakdil, I didn't know about Bersin Mutlu-Pakdil for a very long time.
Which is who's a great role model if you're a young girl, whether it's in the Middle East or anywhere in the world.
Yes.
To hear about this lady going, whoa, it doesn't have to be that I'm, Amal Uddin, who's this stunning George Clooney celebrity's wife, but there are other heroes who can, show me the way.
Yes, and these women have beautiful stories. So
why is it my hero was Captain Planet? I thought I would be blue and have kids running after me. Like, if only I'd known.
That's sad.
Sorry, I didn't mean to take away from the.
No problem at all. So like these women have amazing stories. Why is it that when I go to France, I'm every brown girl who goes to Europe is called Priyanka Chopra. Why am I not called Savitribai Phule? Or why am I not called, another woman who probably
I'm not Pratha, right?
Or that.
Call yourself,
maybe I'm not famous enough, but then there are other women out there who've achieved so much. And it's because we see Priyanka in the media a lot. Even young children know about Priyanka Chopra around the world also. So similarly, every culture has these stories of different
Deepak
women.
Chopra, so it's Chopra is apparently a good
he still
name.
is. I should change my name.
All of us, just everyone from India is a Chopra.
Nobody knows Sunil Shetty, unfortunately, out there. Otherwise,
I mean, immigration would be a dream, right? You're Chopra, please enter. That'd be good. Okay, so that does that happen though? Is Priyanka Chopra now the token Indian expert?
It's Shah Rukh Khan, and Shah Rukh Khan has always been there. And
bit dicey at immigration, but I get it. You know what I mean? But it's earlier it was Apu, so I think we moved up. Apu from The Simpsons. Now it's Priyanka Chopra. I think in 50 years.
And you would be surprised, actually. Apu still comes up in spite of so much coverage happening about how offensive it is. People still find it
I thought Apu was
funny.
Hilarious, right? Not because he was an Indian or mocking an Indian accent or a white person doing an Indian accent. I just thought it was really funny as a kid. Like when I watched Simpsons, oh bloody blood! There's a movie by Peter Sellers called The Party, which was from back in the day, and he does this. I don't know if he puts brown face on or whatever, but it's a hilarious movie. Just maybe, of course, now in today's day and age, it would be like, oh my god, a white man pretending to be brown. No, but he's done such a great job. And the Indian accent, of course, is a little bit stereotypical, but it's just a funny movie. And we didn't know any better, right? We would laugh when we watched that. But of course, Apu, that movie, The Party, all these are now seen as absolute disregard for a certain country, But my thing is, I'd rather watch a movie like that, where someone's attempting to make fun as an Indian, playing an Indian role, or 300 years of British rule.
Make your choice.
Make your choice. Yeah. I mean, would you rather them control you or someone in the sake of entertainment do something. So I don't have the answers, but yeah. So anyway,
But again, then we give, we transfer that authority in a person's hands to determine how people will view me. So
yeah.
will a person view me as Apu tomorrow, or will a person
Hmm.
view me as Priyanka Chopra tomorrow? So again, that power is in somebody else's hands. Right? Why
Hmm.
should that be the scenario?
But why
It's
is it
like,
one individual? Like, why can't it be the profession? Like, maybe say, okay, Priyanka Chopra is a really successful Bollywood actress who transitioned to Hollywood, why
hmm,
and married a really popular pop star.
hmm.
Why can't it be those elements, like an artist, an actor, and a musician, or can't it be those things? Like, oh, are you, like, say for
I
instance,
would
if you,
prefer that. I
right,
would
if you went here,
definitely
are
prefer
you a
that.
musician from India? Like, are you a Bollywood star? Like,
Hmm.
make it more broader, make it about the skill set as opposed to the person.
Person. Yes,
Yeah.
definitely. And that's what I wanted. And that's
Mm.
why, I wanted especially young children to explore that you can be, quote unquote, successful in different professions as well.
Yeah, I think
It
that's really
doesn't have
important.
to be media. You don't have to be Miss World
Yeah,
in
yeah,
order to gain, what you aspire, like the basic aspiration in modern society is success
yeah.
monetarily or fame.
And your
You don't.
inspiration can also be not your same gender. Like I was listening to this guy giving a TED talk, and he said,
Hmm,
my inspiration is this lady who at the age of 55 or 60 became the head of Girl Scouts, and now at the age of 110, she's still working. So what I'm trying to
hmm.
say is that's also a great message, right? Like you as a young girl
That,
or a young boy can
yes.
be inspired by the gender that's not you, which I think is fantastic if you can
It's a
open your mind to that.
it's a fantastic take on it if you're a man, if you're a
Hmm.
boy,
Hmm.
because we see more of that. Like,
Yeah.
on the phone, there are two things I'd like to mention. One of the things was on the phone I was mentioning about children drawing different professions. So there was a
Hmm.
study that was conducted.
Yes, yes, of course. Yeah, you were
Yes,
talking
there was
about
a
this.
study that was conducted of 70 children in the UK, and they were asked to draw different professions. So that was a profession of a firefighter, and a fighter pilot and a
Hmm.
doctor.
Hmm.
61 kids drew all those professions
Hmm.
as male, right?
Mm,
Only
mm.
the rest of them drew them as female. So that gives you an idea of,
That's a
it's easy.
huge
There's a
leading. Yeah,
huge difference
yeah,
that a boy or even a girl is seeing more of men or boys being represented out there as opposed to her.
that is a problem. That is social
And
conditioning in its
that's
finest.
social
Yeah,
conditioning.
yeah.
And there are so the Esther Duflo, she's
Mm,
an economist, she's a Nobel Prize winning economist,
mm, mm.
and she conducted a study in a village in Bengal.
Yeah.
And she saw that when the sarpanch of
Mm,
that panchayat was female, the parents in that village had almost zero qualms or zero hesitation in order to put their girl childs into school for further or higher education,
oh, wow.
right?
Okay.
When
Okay.
the sarpanch was a
Mm,
female, as opposed to another village where there have been no female sarpanches for a very long time, there is a
yeah.
huge difference that
Right.
parents of the children, of the girl child especially, are not as motivated to put their girl child for higher education.
Mm,
So the representation
yeah.
really matters. So why can't a girl child look at a male sarpanch and be equally inspired?
No, I think that day
Yeah.
is sort of getting there sooner than
Hmm.
hopefully. But I know exactly what you mean. There
Yes.
is right now too much of an imbalance for that to have the desired effect,
Yes.
because it's been too much negative conditioning when it comes to male role models. Uh,
Definitely.
so it's either that I think people are like, oh, you be inspired by them, but you can never be them. You can work for them. They can
Hmm.
determine your life, like what we're seeing with Harvey Weinstein. The misery that creates is that when he controls the power, you just are, you better be diminutive, you better be
Hmm.
subservient, otherwise you are no one, which is
Correct.
terrible messaging, right? And for years, I don't, again, I never want to sort of say that is similar to what I felt, but even
Hmm.
with
Hmm.
disability, if you're always told you're not good enough until you are
You believe
perceived
it.
as normal, or you have
Hmm.
to be subservient to a certain group, of course you're going to overcompensate and say, you know what, screw this is not right.
Hmm.
But
Or if you're not constantly grateful for every
yeah,
opportunity that comes your way,
yeah.
then you're not being thankful enough.
Absolutely. I think that's something which, yeah, I think also strikes a chord with me, that you have to be
Hmm.
grateful for everything and everyone. If they help you cross the road, that, oh my God, they are indebted for the rest of your life,
Yes.
which is rubbish. That's
And
usually
they
when they
have
help.
reached nirvana in their head that, wow,
Oh,
I
yeah,
have changed a
absolutely.
person's life today.
Correct. I
Now I
mean, some
deserve
of the,
heaven.
yeah, so usually once they help me cross the road, I just push them off back onto the bus. It's fine. It's just easier.
Go back.
Yeah.
It's a passing car.
I don't know how I find those cars, but there's always one there.
Good, thank
Handy.
you.
One Uber driver's like, sir, did you call? Anyhow, I want you to talk about your book before we, wind up this great conversation. Can you tell people about the book, where they can find the book, and what the book's about?
Okay, so the book is called When I Grow Up, and it's actually a children's book, and it has stories of these amazing women, like we
Mm,
mentioned. There's also Leena in the book, and Barsin Mutlu
fantastic.
Pagde, Savitribai Phule. So there's
Oh,
stories of
lovely.
these women,
Lovely.
and very short snippets of their stories.
Mm,
And it also serves as a coloring book,
mm,
because I always thought while growing up, I would always pick up the peach color when
mm.
I wanted to color the skin of a person that I was drawing.
Oh,
And I think I wanted that to change as well, as I wanted
so peach, you in your head was representing more the
more the color of the
Caucasian,
skin. Yes, because
right?
that we would call that skin color. I don't know if it was the same in your school, but in my school they would call that this is a skin color.
I got thrown out
And
of school at the age of 6 because everything for me was black. I'm joking. I had gray.
gray color.
Gray,
Everybody has gray
man, this kid,
skin.
this kid is messed up in the head. All his characters are ash.
Everybody's Captain Planet.
Yeah, he's burnt everyone.
But
Okay, so
yeah.
that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think I told you before this call. Sorry, that's my dog. She's trying to come into the room. She's not allowed though
Okay.
because she'll disturb us. But
Okay.
about how there was this sociology class I took where Disney's
Yes.
characters were black and white, right? Like the cruel,
Hmm.
the witch in Snow White was black in a black cloak. The Sleeping Beauty mother was like she had black elements, whatever. And
Hmm.
the prince and the princesses were always white, blonde hair, blue eyed kind of thing.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
this, what you're saying, is proof of that. That we
Yeah.
are as kids told that the cute pink and blonde and gold and white and blue and light colors are nice, but the darker it gets,
Hmm.
it's more of the monsters, the goblins, the antagonists, the bad people, the rakshasas, right?
True. And it's not only movies. If you just, in conversation, in casual conversation in India, it so happens that if you're complimenting a baby and you want to say the baby is cute, you say this
Mm.
baby looks like a foreigner.
Mm.
By foreigner, they basically mean Caucasian. It's
Yeah,
because the baby is fair or because
man, they
baby
tell me
has
that.
Caucasian features.
They tell me that when I try to get an auto, they're like, "Sir, are you North Indian?" And I'm like, "Is that a compliment? Is that what is it?" Right? Because they want to say fair. They're like, "You don't look like
Fair.
a South." I'm like, "Dude, I don't care. Why are these things important?" But it is there, and
Yes.
at some very primal level, you're like, okay. When someone says you look
There is
like
a sense of pride for
yeah,
sure.
yeah. When
There
someone
is a
says
sense
like
of
you look,
pride.
if they look at you and say you look like that lady from, say, I mean, I'm not again, right, but they say someone you look like, say someone from like The Crown, as
Hmm.
opposed versus someone like, oh, you look like someone from a Tamil industry, and both are as pretty. You've
Hmm.
been socially conditioned to believe that the former is
Hmm.
more is something that I would brag about,
Yes. And that conditioning it's going to take a long time to
Yeah,
break.
very long time.
Long
Yeah,
time.
absolutely.
And I think that should actually, maybe with our generation, it could be difficult, but with the next generation, it could be easier.
Yeah,
And that's why we need children's books, or we
absolutely.
need representation in popular media that
Mm.
normalizes these things. For
I
example,
think
personal.
kids can really break conditioning that their parents try to force onto them, because the parents might not know. But I
Hmm.
think that age, right, when kids can say, "No, I have friends who are this,
Hmm.
and I will believe that I know them more than what I've been told to believe about them." It's of course kids, but I think it's a very fundamental emotion. It's not something that can be taught. But if they
Hmm.
are exposed to that kind of information and literature and stories, I think it's great that you're putting this out there.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And it's also about asking questions, I
Yeah.
believe. I think now I can see that there is a shift where children are asking the questions and they are receiving answers to it. They're asking uncomfortable questions.
Great. I
And
love uncomfortable questions.
and they are receiving answers to those, as opposed to our generation where our questions were, uncomfortable questions were not answered
Mm.
or were shunned off. So I
Yeah.
think there's that change as well.
No, I think that's amazing because I got heckled by a kid about a month back. I was giving a talk for school kids between the age of 6 and 9
Hmm.
because clearly my career is going well. And the principal's like, say something funny. And I said something funny. And the kid's like, not funny. I was like, dude, I've come here for free. You can't heckle me, you little rat. But anyway, no, I think kids are a great place to
Begin.
begin the messaging with because that's where they did it with bad messaging with
Hmm.
anything, with food, with language, with acceptance. I think that's great what you've done. So people,
Thank
where can
you.
they find your book, and also where can they find you online?
So online, you can find me on Instagram at
Okay.
Pratha S951.
Okay, fantastic.
And you can find the book on Nestry.com. I'm saying Nestry first because if you're Indian, I would prefer you buy local. So
Okay.
there's a
Th-
website called Nestry.
is that Nestree, like nest tree?
No, it's Nestry.
Okay. Okay, lovely. Okay, that's like a
And
story.
available on Amazon as well.
We'll keep the nestree.in first. I think
Yes.
Amazon. Yeah. So lovely. I'll put those links in the
Definitely.
description. And Pratha, thank you so much for joining me on the episode, sharing your story, and for the great work you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It was a lovely conversation. And thank you for giving me this platform as well.
Hey, my pleasure. Catch you soon. And on behalf of everyone listening, thank you again.
Thank you.